appreciate your effort. And all I can say is, based on what I know about you, my hat's off to you. If you'll notice, I took it off.
Yeah, I took my hat off too. All right, so here we go. Welcome back, everyone, to Mother Made. My name is Just Joe, and we have a special guest today. We have Ed Sibley here today, and he's here to discuss intergenerational trauma. It's a really big word, and I want to add this in just to fill in the puzzle piece, to expand our view of what mother-son incest is and how it fits into the grand scheme of things. All right, so we have Ed. Why don't you share with us today a little bit about yourself and what makes you so special about intergenerational trauma, and what is it?
Well, it's what we inherit from our heritage, if you will. Grandparents, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. In my case, I had a great-grandfather that was a combat veteran of the Civil War, and recognizing what PTSD is, the stories my father told me about him fit right into what I had to deal with. My service started in 1959. I enlisted during the Vietnam era. I got in the wrong chow line. I was a buck sergeant, and somebody pinned gold bars on me, made me a second lieutenant. I said to the platoon sergeant, I says, "You're in charge, I'm hiding." In any case, I got out as a major catastrophe, PTSD, complex trauma, that goes back to my inheritance that got played out during attachment or conception, and then attachment, and then developmental issues, adolescence, young adulthood, and I had to deal with what I inherited plus what I learned, both good and bad, during the attachment, developmental, and adolescent years. In any case, at the top of my list is my experience. My academic education has gone to the level of, I have a master's in counseling psychology. I am currently semi-retired, as I've indicated on a number of occasions. That is about the same as being semi-pregnant. I'm still working. I'm still going to school. I'm still attending webinars. I read a lot of books and papers, and I tried to educate myself not just about the intergenerational trauma, but how we play out having traumatic experience passed on in our genes. And when it comes to the genes, you've all heard of DNA. Well, there's another thing called RNA. In our Western culture, we tend to look at things in the singular. We call it stress, when in reality, nature says that there's a positive and a negative. So our nurture aspect of seeing life is in the singular, but nature says there's got to be a positive and a negative. A guy by the name of Hans Sibley published his findings in 1936, and for the next decade was continuing to publish. He identified the singular stress as based on nature, that there's a positive. He called it Eustress, the Greek word for good, EU, put in front of the word stress. Eustress is good stress. The negative is called distress. And at least a few people are recognizing that distress does exist, but trying to get the idea that eustress is there also is a little bit more difficult. In any case, DNA is a double helix. It holds the positive traits. RNA is a single helix, and it holds the negative traits. They get passed on from inheritance, and then we work on adding stuff to the information to the positive and the negative in attachment during our developmental years, adolescence. And when we reach adulthood, we've got to figure out all the things that we made mistakes in learning have to be worked on. And I like the Buddhist expression where they say, the Buddhist proverb, obstacles do not block the path, they are the path. So we have those challenges from what we inherited and from what we learned during our developmental and adolescent years. Got another question?
Yes, I sure do. So, what I hear, or at least what I think I'm hearing, is that we can be predisposed to trauma just by being born in the family. And if our family hasn't healed, not only will we carry it in our DNA, but we'll also then be subject to the actual effects of trauma. So we'll not only have it in our DNA, but we'll also carry it.
Well, it's not just
So
DNA,
it's a double whammy.
remember. It's DNA and RNA. So there's a lot of studies now about RNA and looking at the positive and the negative. The thing about and being in the military, PTSD kind of came to the surface a lot sooner than it did in civilian life. But no matter where you experience trauma, whether it's as a civilian, as a military, it's still the same thing. It is an experience that we have to learn from. And what we do with that experience, first of all, PTSD is only the symptoms. It's not the disease. When you look at PTSD and from a nature base, the disease is distress. And it can, what I teach in my seminars has to do with what I learned in East Asia, what they call the Far East, or where everybody wound up in during the Vietnam era. In any case, what I learned was from a cult called the Pakua. It translates to 8 changes. There are 8 combinations or 4 combinations of 8 opposites. In any case, you've probably heard of a thing called yin and yang. Well, that's the best way to explain duality of nature. Yin and yang. Yin is earth, yang is sky. And that's the cult looked at earth and sky and said, those are opposites. And then it built. In today's cultures in East Asia or the Eastern Hemisphere, it now carries on in what is called Taoism or the way. The Buddhists practice it. Shinto religions in Japan follow it, even to the point where it spread across the land bridge 28,000 years ago from East Asia into North America. And the indigenous peoples of the Americas have the same type of recognition of nature that came out of East Asia. So it kind of helps to explain what's going on in terms of what's happening in the physiology of stress, the brain and the nervous system. We have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. We experience trauma and it's emotional. And the way our nervous system works, you got all the senses coming in through the spinal cord, through the brainstem, and to a large degree, the brainstem will provide instinct on how to deal with those senses. But if it's traumatic, it can get stuck in what is called the amygdala in the limbic system, which deals with all the emotion. And if we get blocked by the emotion and we can't put our intellect to work, we wind up with PTSD or complex trauma. That's how I see it. It's a nature-based understanding of our reality. And until you get into being able to exercise reason and the intellect, we wind up with people with PTSD suffering from a thing called alexithymia. Alexithymia, I learned to identify my own situation where I would sometimes just black out. I'd be driving down the road and I suddenly went blank. The vets I've dealt with, myself included, call it numbing out or blacking out. Just suddenly you don't know where you are. I had the times that it happened to me, it was usually when I was driving. I'd have to pull over to the side of the road and regain a sense of where I was and where I was going. When it comes to figuring out what happened to us in childhood, that is making a mess out of our everyday life, the anger issues, being enraged instead of outraged. the alexithymia is the best way I can explain it. Van der Kolk in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, addresses it. It's trying to reach through the emotion to the intellect where you can identify what the source of the feelings are. In other words, I'm feeling distressed. There's got to be a reason for it. Was it because of the like in Da Nang when they blew up the the ammo dump? It made an impression and it scared the shit it scared a lot of people or traumatized a lot of people. I lost friends in that bombing. One very good friend made it through, but he's still working on it. So how do you identify the source of the source of the emotion that's blocking our ability to figure things out, which is called, that process is called alexithymia. How do you get past the alexithymia to identify where the distress has a reason for existence, and then to do something about it instead of the distractions that we wind up doing because we can't figure it out, like smoking, drinking. My my daughters would say, when the going gets tough, the tough go shopping. So even building up a balance on the credit card to the point where you wind up going into bankruptcy, that's a distraction. It's part of the dissociative process of trying to deal with what we inherited and what we learned that was negative in our childhood. That's the best way I can explain it. One of the things I'd like to read, in my own effort to try to understand why, I wound up writing a poem, and I'll explain it as I go along. I was published to understand what PTSD and complex trauma really is. International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, the special interest group on complex trauma, has published my article that contains this poem. It's to understand why, and to understand what PTSD, complex trauma, really is. And it's in the 2023 newsletter number 7 of the Complex Trauma series. You can access it through Google. Otherwise, you have to be a member of the society to get to their link. The poem, Understanding Why. My parents have always been good people. They did the best they could. Sometimes each was successful in his or her own way, and I learned well from what they did. That's the positive Eustress explanation. The negative distress. At other times there were failures, and my hurt was deeply felt, yet I survived. The anger buried deep within me, and another lesson became inscribed. the way we deal with the negative and the positive, we need to develop healthy boundaries and know how to use unconditional love. Those are the two basics in order to deal with the positives and the negatives. The third stanza about healthy boundaries. Influenced further by clan, tribe, and society all. In time I found myself living what I had absorbed, successes and failures both. And with the experience, a realization that my freedom to choose depends so much on my basis of choice. The unconditional love part, a beginning and understanding, compassion and more, to know forgiveness for being human without having to praise or condone what is done, to embrace the past, both good and bad, and with it all the ability to move on. The other two elements that are necessary to embrace our past and our present are respect and trust. And the last stanza, to deal with that, like my parents and their parents before them, I can strive to improve on what has been taught. To know there is more where better is possible, because even the good is not enough. But, like so many before me, I too will never be perfect. At least, not now, not in this life. That's copyrighted 1993 is when I wrote it. Essentially, what
That's
we wind up doing.
inspiring.
I'm sorry?
Very inspiring. Thank you.
I sent that as part of the package the last time I sent an email to you. You have a copy of the article that was published, and in that article is that poem. So if you want to pass it along, the link is also part of the package I sent you.
Yep.
We
I'll
get
attach
into
it to the bottom of this in the comment.
Okay, now I know you're working on trying to figure out the formula, the mathematical formula to figure out what I identified as psychological stress, the disease aspect of understanding PTSD. I learned that our expectations, I learned it from the book was written by Ronnie Janoff Bullman, now Professor Emeritus from UMass Amherst. The book is called Shattered Assumptions. She identified that we're all born needing to, with a sense of fulfillment for benevolence, meaning, and self-worth. I call it the BMW complex. BMW, the ultimate driving machine, well, the ultimate living machine, BMW, benevolence, meaning, and worth, self-worth in this case. So those are our emotional expectations. Now, if you look at the laws of nature and Newton's laws of motion and Einstein's laws of motion, the first four, you wind up with, that's the force, benevolence, meaning, and self-worth, the sense of fulfillment that we have. So that's the force. But what's the reference plane or the body? You get a force against the body that creates in physics stress. So in psychology, psychological stress, if you do the interpolation, extrapolation from hard science or nature to put into nurture, the reference plane is our perception of reality. Did we get benevolence? Did we get meaning? Did we get self-worth? Whether it true or false, actual or imagined. If we didn't get it, we wind up with distress. If we did get those three elements, then we wind up in a state of eustress. In any case, when the emotional expectation, the force, is applied against the reference frame, the body, the result is psychological stress, wherein the conflict between the expectation and the reality can either be resolved, resulting in eustress, or unresolved, resulting in distress. And therein lies the what I tried to get across to my colleagues. Unfortunately, there are some that are so harmed and hurt by what they went through and they haven't resolved it, that their only reaction is to seek revenge. They're angry as hell. They're in a state of enrage instead of being able to feel outraged to do something about it. So when you're enraged, you're hurting self or others. And unfortunately, I find too many that are in that category, and they can't get out of their emotion into their intellect. And for some reason, there's a way around it academically. They wind up with PhDs, MDs, PsyDs, or whatever, but they haven't got the understanding of what the cycle of life, the cycle of violence is all about, and they wind up perpetuating it on other people because I call them the hammer and nail crowd. Everything looks like a nail, so you hit it with a hammer. The United States has the highest ratio of incarcerated people in the world. And that's how we seem to be dealing with helping others, or instead of helping others, work through the trauma of what they experienced and what they inherited. Put them away. Don't deal with it. Get revenge. Seek punishment. It isn't justice. It's their way of dealing with where they are in life. They're hurting. Forgiveness.
So
One last thing. The key to overcoming that is forgiveness. And I recommend strongly the books by Desmond Tutu, the bishop from South Africa. Has written extensively on how to forgive. The reason forgiveness, you start with, well, the 3 R's. Respect for self. So you've got to learn how to forgive yourself, because you learn things that were negative, but you're working on things as best you can, given the psychology and the circumstances of your past and where you are now. You're human. You make mistakes. Forgive yourself because forgiveness is for the person, not the deed. Learn it for yourself, and then with compassion, learn it for forgiving those who harmed you, because as it says, as I wrote in the poem, and what we're talking about in terms of intergenerational trauma, it's been there in the past right along. So work through it, get over it, move on. And the 3 R's: respect for self, respect for others, and accept responsibility. Be responsible. As a matter of fact, that comes from the Dalai Lama. So on that happy note, I'll shut up.
So we have a lot of statistics out there that show what men are capable of doing, right? RAINN has 93% of all criminals, sex criminals, are male who are violent. And one of the things that I've learned through my work is that sexual violence does not always need violence. I have learned that seduction can be just as powerful. And since there's no force, there's a psychological force, not a physical force. The confusion really steps in. And so what I've been working on, and what really started to confuse me. Go ahead.
No. You're spot on, because the only thing I would add is that we learned both good and bad, and sex has a strong positive feeling. It feels good. And unfortunately, if it's taught in a negative environment, an unhealthy environment. I had a very good friend who, his father was merchant marine, 6 months out at sea. Mother took him to bed. And that's how he learned about sex. The feel good part of it, even though it was inappropriate, influenced how he behaved later in life. So it doesn't have to be, as you clearly state and correctly state, it doesn't have to be violence to make it a learned behavior that is not healthy.
And so with the other, I use statistics here because I'm a math guy, right? And so if 1 in 3 young women below the age of 18 experience sexual abuse or assault, and they never heal from that, does that trauma, so with what you're saying is that trauma would carry forward on to their children. Is that a fair statement?
It's fair, in the sense that it can. It doesn't necessarily mean that at some point they don't recognize the negative behavior and make changes. To be perfectly honest, that's how I got to this point, recognizing that what the negatives that I learned were interfering in how I dealt with my own kids. And as a consequence, not only did, my oldest, one of the things that she got through the alexithymia on, and she's still working on it, and she's in her 50s. She said to me when she was drunk, "Dad, when you went to Vietnam, everything changed." She was 2.5 years old. Sense of abandonment. Didn't know what the hell hit her. Where's Dad? Well, we had a very close bond up to that point, and I disappeared for a year. The point is that she learned how she had an emotional blockage that she could not identify, and as a consequence, she acted out on it. She's had her own problems. She's not alone. There are others, as you state, that because of what they and how they learn, there's the severe traumatic experience, but there's the subtle experience that you just noted, that it doesn't have to be severe trauma, but it's a learned behavior and it gets passed on.
Hold on 1 second, Ed.
Well, in that case, all I can say is that, well, I think I've pretty
Here we're
well
back. All
covered.
right. So yeah, no, I got a couple more questions I want to ask you, and then we're going to be done.
You mean
All
you're
right,
going to
let me
poke me
figure out
with a
how I'm going
fork
to
to
ask
see if
this
I'm
one.
done?
There you go. Um, one of the things that I discovered as I work with sex offenders is that as I listen back, the majority of them had some form of inappropriate relationship with their mother, and I ended up picking up a book by Dr. Milewski on mother-son incest, and it was eye-opening for me. And what I came to understand was that basically these mothers are turning their children and they're making them their co-partner. Parentification is what I would call it, and it ranges just from emotional enmeshment, inappropriate conversations, all the way up to sleeping in the bed to sexual contact. So I mean, it's not that everything is this way, and so really what I all I want to do is shine a light on an area. We know that men are sexual predators, uh, and with mothers and women who haven't healed from their sexual abuse, that rage and shame just doesn't
I
disappear. Fucking A. No, that's fine. I'm just going to cut that last bit out and we're going to leave it at that. But, okay.